Thank you very much to PMEA for organizing the 5th International Conference on Educational Measurement and Evaluation. This is very timely and very helpful for our educators. I am Jason Chavez from Zamboanga Peninsula Polytechnic State University. This is the newest university in Zamboanga City and in Region 9. I'm very happy because I have a chance to present to you my research on reconfiguring assessments in online education, lens from the learners and educators during pandemic. So what is this study about? So accordingly, the health crisis forces education to shift to online and modular classes according to Tukero last year, which basically affects more than 28 million learners in the country according to UNESCO in the same year. So the focus of this current study is to examine the different practices, assessments in online education, including some strategies to carry out the assessments, which means are they going to use leniency and flexibility because we are now in the current difficult setting, and strategies in protecting the integrity and quality of these assessments. So what were the objectives of the study? The first one is to determine the types of assessment tools teachers use in online education during the pandemic. So these are practices in terms of portfolio-based assessment, practical assessment, specifically for technology and TLE subjects, skills and competency-based assessments. This refers to subjects or certain outcomes which measure skills and competencies. The next objective is to identify the strategies used to carry out the assessments in online education. So these are some of the practices that are being implemented or being analyzed in terms of assessment by leniency and in terms of assessment by flexibility. When you talk about leniency, this refers to generally about patience and tolerance in terms of conducting our assessments to our learners. If you talk about flexibility, this means that you have a lot of other portals or you have a lot of other channels or medium where assessments is being conducted. So it may be through phone, it could be through messenger, or to any forms of simple technological application. The next objective is to find out the strategies employed to protect the quality and integrity of the assessment in online education during this crisis. So this may be in a form of parallel validation wherein the teacher will validate through phone call or oral conversation on the assessment being responded to by the students. We also have randomization, or this means that you're going to randomize items specifically for multiple choice items where the students will not be able to identify patterns of correct or wrong answers. On strict condition, this refers to teachers setting conditions like allotting limited times and allotting strict deadlines. When you talk about penalization for cheating, these are conditions on assessment that whenever they cheat, they will be penalized. But the teachers has to tell this before the conduct of the assessment. The next is to assess the responses based on the respondents' demographic profile. This means that we wanted to analyze responses coming from the different groups under the profile of gender, indigent status, the different computer literacy level, and the different academic roles like teachers and the learners. For our framework, we have the assessment practices, proceeding to the strategies to protect one's quality and integrity in assessments, and of course, this proceeds to quality education through quality assessments. For our population and sampling, we use stratified sampling as technique. We use 200 students from 5 colleges, which means we use 40 students from each of these colleges. We also have 100 respondent teachers from 5 colleges, meaning 20 teachers from each of these colleges. And the respondents are technically teachers and students who are teaching and enrolled during the school year of 2020 and 2021. 3 instruments were used for this study. There are 3 sets of original surveys to gather information on these 3 categories. Number 1, we have Assessment Practices Survey. Number 2, Survey on Assessment Strategies on Leniency and Flexibility. And lastly, we have Survey on Quality and Integrity Assessments. Before the actual collection of data and analysis, the researcher implemented a validity test resulting to 0.94, 0.93, and 0.89 Cronbach alpha for the 3 survey questionnaires. The researcher was very particular in terms of following the guidelines in gathering data. So we asked permission and clearance from authorities. We asked consent from our respondents. And then we scheduled the conduct of research through answering them in Google Forms. We had this study since October 2020 and finished in May 2021, and we had 100% retrieval of these responses. For our profile, we have gender, with male at 30% and female at 70%. We have indigency status, with indigent at 59% and non-indigent at 41%. We have the computer literacy level, with those who needs training at 57%, and those who are currently at average or advanced level at 43%. On academic roles, we have students at 67% and teachers at 33%. So after gathering the data, the results and discussions are as follows. For question number 2 on practices, portfolio-based assessment, practical assessments, and skill or competency-based assessments receive high marks, which means that both the students and teachers agree that these practices are being done by teachers and being experienced by the students. On question number 3 on strategies to carry out assessments, teachers and students agree that leniency and flexibility have been implemented or being conducted by teachers. Question number 4, which asks about the strategies on how to protect the quality and integrity of the assessments. All the categories like parallel validation, randomization, strict condition, and penalization receive high marks. If you would notice the mean on the strategies under quality and integrity, they seem to be lower compared to those under the how to carry out in the practices. I think because it is on the characteristics of how these assessments are being conducted, because there's a little form of strictness and rigidity on the rules that the teachers set whenever they wanted to protect the quality and integrity. But then at the end of the day, they are still getting high marks. Let's analyze the significant difference basing on the responses based on the demographic profile of our respondents. Let's go first to gender. Under this demographic profile, our genders male and female, which means they have different responses in terms of flexibility, randomization, strict condition, and penalization practices on assessments, which means that we have to analyze deeper as to which gender has to be given more emphasis in terms of maybe the ease of conducting the assessments under these categories or under these practices. Let's go to the next demographic profiles. We have indigent and the computer literacy level. Both of them have different responses on one particular category, which is strict condition. I think for indigent, under this group, we assume that they have lesser resources in terms of access to technology or computer. So that's why it's kind of difficult to undergo assessments on strict condition if they use computer. While on computer literacy level, we can assume that in terms of the readiness to use computer or technology when they do their assessments, they may experience some difficulty. So that's why they may have lesser appreciation in terms of the practice of strict condition. The next demographic profile is under the academic roles, which are students and teachers. So these are corroboration in terms of how the teachers are practicing their assessments as to whether these students are appreciating these practices and the conduct of assessments. So technically, they differ. In terms of practical assessment, maybe the students find it difficult as to the rules set by the teachers in terms of the conduct of assessment. The same thing with flexibility. Maybe students feel that they need more flexibility on the part of the teachers when they conduct their assessments, as well as on strict condition. I think when you talk about strictness in guidelines, maybe that's a little bit more rigid and students may not be able to cope with it as others. So in the same breath, when you talk about penalization, I think this is not the time to conduct assessments based on penalization when they cheat, because it's already difficult during this time. So maybe they don't appreciate teachers who still have penalization whenever they experience. We have very specific recommendation. The first is on the educators. We believe that educators should employ particularly these assessment tools that are widely applicable to their students and will protect the quality and integrity of the assessments. We know that it's important to protect the quality and integrity of these assessment practices, but at the same time, it is also very important to consider the profile of the students. Like for example, on their gender in terms of their indigency, in terms of their computer literacy level. So if these profiles are considered in terms of the conduct or implementation of assessments, I think more students are being able to comply with the assessments implemented by the teachers. And then it is better also at the end of the day for our quality of education because we're able to reach out to more students at the end of the day. The next specific recommendation is for our institutions. We believe that institutions should develop a guidebook or manual for assessment practices. If an institution have this manual or guidebook, teachers who are confused and teachers who have lesser experience in terms of the conduct of assessments during a crisis or during a pandemic, they'll be able to be guided, no, or have direction in terms of doing and implementing assessments to their students. So these are very good resources in terms of clarity and at least a better implementation of assessment in spite of a gray area in terms of this time. So the institution should also provide support and training for the conduct of the different practices like lenient, flexible, and quality assessments to the students. Why? Because we think that if schools or institutions provide support and training, it's going to be a better confidence for our teacher in terms of doing assessments. Because we already know that everyone is confused already or in gray areas as to the implementation of assessments. At least if the teachers buy and they orient them of some developments in assessment practices, then they will be able to practice and implement assessments better to their students. And the last specific recommendation will be coming from our stakeholders. We want them to continuously provide feedback to the educators and institutions. So we want good feedbacks from our students, our community, and other observers. Because this is the only way to help each other maybe tackle certain aspects of assessments which the institution or teachers have not considered. So feedbacks and information are very, very important basis for the next steps because everyone is getting confused and everyone seems to get really different feedbacks with the conduct of assessments, as well as study assessment practices while navigating the educational environments during this crisis. So I think we know this for a fact that everyone is navigating the educational landscape, no? Specifically, if we talk about assessments, we know that there is a difficulty in conducting assessments because we don't have face-to-face classes. And if we talk about online education, it's not available to everyone. So there are some other resorts that we might combine or we might mix in terms of the delivery of assessment so that we can really measure the learning that they have on this time. And of course, not to forget, we have to consider also some foresights in the future, no, during the post-pandemic time. So if pandemic is already done, if there are feedback and there are study also, we can go back to our notebooks and see if those experiences now can be used in the future whenever there will be similar crisis or another pandemic. So thank you very much for listening. I am Jason V. Chavez once again from Zamboanga City. I hope you learned something from my research on reconfiguring assessments in online education, lens from learners and educators during pandemic. Once again, muchas gracias.